Every great hero begins with a birth story, and Perseus's arrival was anything but ordinary. Forget the usual cradle and lullabies. His birth was wrapped in prophecy, scandal, and divine intervention. If you've ever thought your family was complicated, wait until you hear about his. Perseus was the son of Danae, a princess locked away in a bronze chamber by her father, King Acrisius of Argos. Why? Because an oracle had told Acrisius that Danae's son would one day kill him. And like any paranoid king, he thought the best solution was to lock his daughter in a shiny metal room and hope fate would get bored. Spoiler: fate never gets bored. Enter Zeus, king of the gods, who looked down from Olympus and decided Danae was far too beautiful to be left alone in a prison of bronze. But Zeus didn't knock politely or send flowers. No, he transformed himself into a shower of golden rain, because gods in Greek myths love dramatic entrances, and slipped through the cracks of the chamber. Danae became pregnant, and soon Perseus was born. This baby was no ordinary child. He was half mortal, half divine, destined for greatness, and already the subject of gossip in Argos. Acrisius, the nervous grandfather, was horrified. He had tried so hard to avoid grandchildren, and now here was Perseus, a bouncing baby boy with divine blood and a prophecy hanging over his head. The birth of Perseus set the stage for everything to come: the impossible challenges, the magical gifts, the slaying of Medusa, and the rescue of Andromeda. But for now, he was just a baby who would one day change the fate of kings, monsters, and gods. Before we drift off, like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments from where you're watching from and which story you want me to cover next. If you think fortune tellers can be unsettling, imagine being a king in ancient Greece and hearing that your own grandson is destined to kill you. That's exactly what happened to King Acrisius of Argos, and it ruined his mood forever. Acrisius was a proud ruler, but he had one problem: no sons. He only had a daughter, Danae, and in the patriarchal world of ancient kings, that was considered a disaster. So, like any worried monarch, he went to consult the oracle at Delphi, hoping for reassurance. Instead, the oracle gave him the worst bedtime story ever. Your daughter will bear a son, and that son will kill you. Talk about a prophecy that makes family dinners awkward. Acrisius left the oracle trembling, muttering to himself, and probably regretting ever asking. He could have accepted fate gracefully, but no, Acrisius was stubborn. He decided to outsmart destiny. Spoiler: nobody outsmarts destiny in Greek mythology. His brilliant plan: lock Danae away in a bronze chamber so that no man could ever reach her. He thought, no husband, no child, no prophecy fulfilled. It was airtight logic, except for one tiny detail: gods don't care about bronze chambers. This prophecy set the stage for everything that followed. It was the reason Danae was imprisoned, the reason Zeus appeared as golden rain, and the reason Perseus was born into a world where his very existence was considered dangerous. Acrisius's fear of fate became the thread that wove the entire story of Perseus. And so, the prophecy of King Acrisius was not just a warning, it was the spark that ignited the legend. Without it, Perseus might never have been cast into the sea, never have slain Medusa, and never have become one of the greatest heroes of Greek mythology. King Acrisius thought he had solved his problem by locking his daughter Danae inside a bronze chamber. He believed that if no man could reach her, then no child could be born. and the prophecy of his death at the hands of his grandson would never come true. It was a plan that seemed clever on paper, but in Greek mythology, clever plans rarely survive the meddling of the gods. Dano lived in her chamber, surrounded by bronze walls that gleamed in the light. She was isolated, lonely, and watched constantly. Acrisius thought he had created the perfect prison, but what he had really built was a stage for one of the strangest divine entrances in all mythology. High above, Zeus looked down from Olympus. He saw Dano, and her beauty caught his eye. Now, Zeus was not known for restraint. When he desired someone, he found a way, no matter how impossible the circumstances. But this time, he chose a form that was both dazzling and bizarre. Instead of appearing as a man or a god, or even an animal, which he often did, Zeus transformed himself into a shower of golden rain. The golden rain poured down through the cracks of the bronze chamber, shimmering as it fell. It was not ordinary rain, it was divine, radiant, and filled with power. Dano, trapped in her prison, was overwhelmed by this miraculous vision. From that golden rain, she conceived a child. This child was Perseus, destined to be one of the greatest heroes of Greek mythology. His birth was not the result of ordinary love or chance, but of divine intervention. He was half mortal, half god, born from a union that defied walls, locks, and human schemes. For Acrisius, this was a disaster. He had tried to outwit fate, but fate had slipped through the cracks, literally. His daughter now carried the very child he had feared, the grandson who would one day fulfill the prophecy. The bronze chamber had failed, and destiny had triumphed. Dano, however, saw Perseus as a gift. Though her circumstances were strange and her father's actions cruel, she embraced her son with love. The golden rain had brought her hope, even in confinement. Perseus's birth was a reminder that no prison can hold back destiny, and no king can outsmart the will of the gods. King Acrisius had a problem. His daughter Dano had given birth to Perseus, and the prophecy that haunted him was now alive in the form of a baby boy. Acrisius knew that this child was destined to kill him one day, and he was determined to prevent it. But killing his own grandson outright would have been too risky. The gods might punish him, and the people might revolt. So he came up with a plan that was cruel but indirect. He ordered that Dano and her infant son be placed inside a large wooden chest. Imagine the scene: a mother clutching her baby, surrounded by planks of wood, while soldiers nailed the lid shut. Acrisius believed that if he cast them into the sea, fate would take care of the rest. The waves would swallow them, and he would be safe from the prophecy. The chest was carried to the shore and pushed into the water. It bobbed uncertainly at first, then drifted away, carried by the currents. Dano held Perseus tightly, whispering prayers to the gods, hoping that someone would hear her. The sea was vast, the waves were merciless, and the chest was fragile. Yet, somehow, it floated. This moment was both terrifying and symbolic. Acrisius thought he was escaping destiny, but in reality, he was delivering Perseus into the hands of fate. The sea, often seen as a force of chaos, became the pathway to the hero's future. Danae's courage and Perseus's divine blood kept them alive as the chest drifted across the waters. Days passed, and the chest continued to float. Dano must have wondered if she and her son would ever see land again. Perseus, too young to understand, simply slept in her arms, unaware that his journey had already begun. The prophecy was still alive, carried across the waves in a wooden box. Eventually, the chest would reach the island of Seriphos, where their story would take a new turn. But for now, they were at the mercy of the sea, drifting between despair and hope, waiting for destiny to reveal its next step. The wooden chest carrying Dano and baby Perseus drifted for days across the restless sea. Waves rose and fell, winds howled, and yet the chest did not sink. It was as if fate itself kept them afloat, guiding them toward the next chapter of their story. Eventually, the chest washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, a small but important place in the myth. Here lived a kind fisherman named Dictys, whose name literally means net, true to his name. Dictys was out casting his nets when he spotted the strange chest bobbing near the shore. Curious, he pulled it in, pried it open, and found a frightened woman clutching her infant son. Dictys was no king, no warrior, no god, just a simple fisherman. Yet he showed more kindness than Acrisius ever had. He welcomed Dano and Perseus, offering them shelter and care. Under his protection, Perseus grew up strong and healthy, learning the ways of the island and the sea. Dano, though still haunted by her father's cruelty, found peace in the quiet life Seriphos offered. But as always, in Greek mythology, peace never lasts long. Seriphos was ruled by King Polydex, brother of Dictys. Unlike Dictys, Polydex was not kind. He was ambitious, selfish, and soon became infatuated with Dano. He wanted her for himself, but Dano resisted, clinging to her son and refusing the king's advances. Still, for a time, Perseus's childhood on Seriphos was marked by safety and growth. He was no longer drifting helplessly at sea. He had a home, a guardian, and the beginnings of the strength that would one day make him a hero. The island became the stage where his destiny would unfold, where kindness and cruelty would collide, and where Perseus would be tested in ways that would shape his legend forever. Life on Seriphos might have been peaceful under the care of Dictys, the kind fisherman, but every island has its ruler, and Seriphos was no exception. Its king was Polydex, brother of Dictys, and he was nothing like his gentle sibling. Where Dictys was kind and humble, Polydex was ambitious, selfish, and more than a little cruel. Polydex soon noticed Dano, the beautiful mother of Perseus. He desired her, not out of love, but out of pride and possession. Dano, however, wanted nothing to do with him. She had endured enough suffering at the hands of her father, Acrisius, and she was determined to protect herself and her son. Polydex's advances were met with resistance, and this only fueled his anger. Perseus, growing into a strong young man, became his mother's protector. He stood against Polydex, refusing to let the king force Dano into marriage. This defiance enraged Polydex, who began to see Perseus not just as an obstacle, but as a threat to his authority. Now Polydex was clever in his cruelty. He knew he couldn't simply kill Perseus outright. The gods might intervene, and the people might rebel. Instead, he devised a plan to get rid of the young hero without dirtying his own hands. He would send Perseus on an impossible mission, one that no mortal could hope to survive. But before that plan unfolded, Polydex tried to humiliate Perseus publicly. He announced that he intended to marry another woman, and demanded that all the men of Seriphos bring him gifts to celebrate. Horses were the preferred offering, but Perseus, poor and proud, had none to give. When Polydex mocked him, Perseus rashly declared that he could bring the king anything he desired, even the head of Medusa, the most fearsome of the Gorgons. Polydex seized upon this boast. With a sly smile, he demanded exactly that. the head of Medusa. It was a challenge designed to destroy Perseus, for Medusa was a monster whose gaze could turn men to stone. Sending Perseus after her was as good as signing his death warrant. And so Polydex's cruelty set the stage for Perseus's greatest adventure. What began as a scheme to rid himself of a troublesome young man would become the legend of the hero who dared to face the Gorgon. King Polydex had finally found his chance to rid himself of Perseus. The boast that Perseus had made, that he could bring the king anything, even the head of Medusa, was too tempting for Polydex to ignore. With a sly grin, he declared that this would be Perseus's task. Medusa was no ordinary foe. She was one of the 3 Gorgon sisters, hideous creatures with snakes for hair, and faces so terrifying that a single glance could turn a man to stone. Of the 3, Medusa was the only mortal, but that hardly made her less dangerous. Her lair was said to be far away, hidden at the edge of the world, guarded by shadows and silence. Polydex knew that sending Perseus after Medusa was essentially sending him to his death. No mortal had ever faced her and lived. It was the perfect way to remove the young man who stood in the way of his desires for Dano to the court. Polydex presented it as a noble quest, but everyone knew it was a trap. Perseus, however, was proud and determined. He could not back down from the challenge, especially after boasting so boldly. To refuse would mean humiliation, and worse, it would leave his mother vulnerable to Polydex's schemes. So, he accepted the impossible task, even though he had no idea how he would accomplish it. This moment marked the turning point in Perseus's life. He was no longer just the son of Dano, raised by a fisherman on a quiet island. He was now a hero in the making, facing a challenge that would test his courage, his wit, and his destiny. The impossible challenge was not just about slaying a monster, it was about proving himself, protecting his mother, and fulfilling the role that fate had carved out for him. And so, Perseus set out on his journey, armed with little more than determination and the knowledge that he was walking into danger. The path ahead was uncertain, but the challenge had been set, and there was no turning back. Perseus had accepted the impossible challenge to bring back the head of Medusa. But let's be honest, without help, he wouldn't have stood a chance. Facing a monster whose gaze could turn men to stone was not exactly something you could prepare for with a few push-ups and a sharpened sword. Luckily for Perseus, the gods were watching. 2 of them decided to step in: Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, and Hermes, messenger of the gods and master of speed. Each had their own reasons. Athena despised Medusa, who had once been a beautiful maiden until she was cursed. Helping Perseus was her way of settling old scores. Hermes, on the other hand, enjoyed adventure and had a soft spot for heroes who dared to take on impossible quests. Athena appeared before Perseus, radiant and commanding, her armor gleaming. She told him plainly that he could not defeat Medusa without divine assistance. Hermes soon joined her, winged sandals on his feet, ready to guide Perseus across the world. Together, they became his mentors, equipping him with the knowledge and tools he would need. Athena explained the dangers, Medusa's gaze, her lair, and the fact that her sisters would defend her fiercely. Hermes added that Perseus would need more than courage. He would need cunning, speed, and gifts from the gods themselves. This was the moment when Perseus's quest shifted from hopeless to possible. With Athena's wisdom and Hermes's guidance, he was no longer just a mortal boy sent to die. He was becoming a hero chosen by the gods, armed with divine support. The intervention of Athena and Hermes also showed the balance of Greek mythology. Heroes were brave, yes, but they were rarely alone. The gods often stepped in, shaping destinies, lending their power, and ensuring that mortals could achieve the impossible. Perseus's journey was not just his own. It was a collaboration between man and God, courage and wisdom, mortal determination and divine favor. And so, with Athena and Hermes at his side, Perseus prepared to seek out the magical items that would make his quest possible. The path ahead was still dangerous, but now he had allies who could tip the scales in his favor. Perseus had courage, but courage alone was not enough to face Medusa. Even the bravest warrior would turn to stone the moment he looked into her eyes. That's why Athena and Hermes, having taken him under their divine guidance, arranged for Perseus to receive a set of extraordinary gifts, tools that would transform him from a doomed young man into a hero with a fighting chance. The first gift was Hermes's winged sandals. With these, Perseus could fly across land and sea, swift as the wind, no longer bound to the slow pace of ships or the weary march of feet. He could soar above the world, reaching places no mortal could. The sandals were light, elegant, and practical, the ancient Greek equivalent of a javelin. Next came Athena's polished shield. This was no ordinary shield. It gleamed like a mirror. Athena instructed Perseus never to look directly at Medusa, but instead to use the shield's reflection to see her without meeting her deadly gaze. It was a clever trick, turning defense into offense, and it would prove to be the key to his survival. Then came the cap of invisibility, sometimes said to belong to Hades himself. With this, Perseus could vanish from sight, slipping past enemies and escaping danger. It was the ultimate disguise, a cloak that made him untouchable. Finally, Perseus received a special sword, sharp enough to pierce even the scales of monsters. Some stories say it was given by Hermes, others by Hephaestus, the god of the forge. Either way, it was no ordinary blade. It was crafted for a hero, designed to cut through destiny itself. Together, these gifts formed a divine arsenal: winged sandals for speed, a mirrored shield for cunning, an invisible cap for stealth, and a sword for strength. Perseus was no longer just a mortal boy sent on an impossible mission. He was now a chosen hero, armed with the blessings of the gods. The gifts also carried a deeper meaning. They showed that even in the harsh world of Greek mythology, mortals were not abandoned. When courage met destiny, the gods lent their aid, turning impossible challenges into legendary victories. Perseus's journey was still dangerous, but with these gifts he had hope, and hope was the greatest gift of all. Perseus had the gifts of the gods: winged sandals, a mirrored shield, a sword, and the cap of invisibility. But he still needed one crucial thing: directions. Medusa's lair was hidden at the edge of the world, and no map or sailor could guide him there. To find it, Perseus had to seek out the Gree sisters, 3 strange women who held the secret to the Gorgon's location. The Gree were unlike any mortals or gods Perseus had ever heard of. They were ancient, gray-haired from birth, and shared between them a single eye and a single tooth. Yes, you read that correctly. One eye, one tooth, passed back and forth like borrowed items. When one sister wanted to see, she popped in the eye. When another wanted to chew, she popped in the tooth. It was a system that worked for them, but to outsiders, it was bizarre and unsettling. Perseus set out to find them, flying with Hermes's sandals and guided by Athena's wisdom. The journey was long, filled with mountains, rivers, and endless stretches of land. At last, he reached the desolate place where the Gree lived, a shadowy corner of the world that seemed forgotten by time. The sisters were huddled together, muttering and passing the eye back and forth. Perseus watched them carefully, realizing that their strange habit was also their weakness. If he could snatch the eye, he could control them, forcing them to reveal the path to Medusa's lair. But Perseus did not rush. He waited for the perfect moment, watching as one sister handed the eye to another. Just as it was in mid-air, Perseus darted forward, quick as lightning, and seized it. The sisters shrieked, fumbling in blindness, their hands clawing at the air. Without their eye, they were helpless. Perseus held the eye firmly, refusing to return it until they gave him what he wanted. The Gree, terrified and desperate, finally revealed the secret, the way to the Gorgon's lair, hidden at the edge of the world, where shadows and silence guarded the monsters. This encounter showed Perseus's cunning. He did not defeat the sisters with strength, but with cleverness and timing. It was a reminder that heroes are not only defined by their swords, but by their ability to outwit those who stand in their way. With the directions secured, Perseus prepared for the next stage of his journey. The path to Medusa was now open, and the legend was about to reach its most dangerous chapter. Perseus had found the Gree sisters, those strange old women who shared one eye and one tooth between them. Their habit of passing the eye back and forth was odd enough, but for Perseus, it was also the perfect opportunity. He needed their knowledge, and he knew their weakness. The sisters sat together, muttering in the shadows, their wrinkled hands fumbling as they passed the eye from one to another. One sister would pop it in, squinting at the world, then hand it off to the next, who would blink and complain about the view. It was a routine they had followed for centuries, and they never imagined anyone would dare interrupt it. But Perseus was clever. He waited, silent and patient, until the moment the eye was in mid-air, traveling from one sister's hand to another. Then, with the speed of Hermes's sandals, he darted forward and snatched it. The sisters shrieked in horror, clawing at the air, blind and helpless. Without their eye, they were lost in darkness. Perseus held the eye firmly, refusing to give it back. The sisters begged, pleaded, and cursed, but he stood his ground. He told them he would return the eye only if they revealed the secret path to the Gorgon's lair. The sisters, terrified of remaining blind forever, reluctantly agreed. They described the way to the edge of the world, where Medusa and her sisters slept among shadows and stone. This act was not just about gaining directions. It was about Perseus proving his cunning. He did not defeat the sisters with strength, but with timing and wit. By stealing the eye, he turned their greatest weakness into his advantage. It was a reminder that heroes are not only defined by their swords, but by their ability to outthink those who stand in their way. Once the sisters had given him the knowledge he needed, Perseus returned the eye. He had no desire to torment them further. He simply wanted the truth. The Gree, shaken and humbled, watched as Perseus prepared to continue his journey. With the directions secured, Perseus now knew where to go. The path to Medusa's lair was open, and the most dangerous part of his quest was about to begin. Armed with the gifts of the gods and the directions wrestled from the Gree sisters, Perseus was finally ready to set out for Medusa's lair. But this was no ordinary journey. The Gorgons lived at the very edge of the world, in a place so remote and desolate that even the bravest travelers avoided it. It was said to be a land of shadows, where the sun barely reached and silence hung heavy in the air. Perseus, strapped on Hermes's winged sandals, feeling the strange lightness as he lifted off the ground. With each step, he soared across mountains, rivers, and seas, covering distances that would have taken mortals months. The sandals carried him swiftly, but the journey was still long, filled with eerie landscapes and reminders that he was leaving the familiar world behind. He passed through lands where statues stood frozen, their faces twisted in terror. These were not works of art, but victims of Medusa's gaze, reminders of the danger that awaited him. Each stone figure was a warning. One wrong glance, and Perseus would join them. The air grew colder as he approached the edge of the world. The land was barren, lifeless, and silent. No birds sang, no rivers flowed, no voices echoed. It was a place untouched by joy, a fitting home for creatures as dreadful as the Gorgons. Perseus tightened his grip on the sword, adjusted Athena's mirrored shield, and pulled the cap of invisibility close. He knew that every step brought him closer to the most dangerous moment of his life. Yet he pressed on, guided by courage, determination, and the knowledge that the gods themselves had chosen him for this task. The journey to the Gorgon's lair was not just a physical passage, it was a crossing into destiny. Perseus was leaving behind the world of mortals and entering the realm of myth, where heroes faced monsters and legends were born. At last, he reached the dark cavern where the Gorgons slept. The entrance loomed before him, silent and foreboding, the final threshold between safety and peril. Perseus paused, steadying his breath, knowing that the next step would carry him into the heart of danger. At last, Perseus reached the dark cavern where the Gorgons dwelled. The air was heavy, the silence unsettling, and the ground littered with stone figures, men who had once been brave enough to enter, only to be frozen forever by Medusa's gaze. Each statue stood as a grim warning, their faces twisted in terror, their bodies locked in eternal stillness. Inside the cavern, Perseus found the three sisters. The Gorgons were monstrous, with scales, claws, and hair made of writhing snakes. Their presence was terrifying, but at this moment they were asleep. Medusa lay among them, her serpents hissing softly as they dreamed, while her immortal sisters guarded her in slumber. Perseus knew this was his only chance. He could not face them awake. Their power was too great. He pulled the cap of invisibility tightly over his head, ensuring that even if one stirred, he would remain unseen. He raised Athena's polished shield, careful not to look directly at Medusa, and instead watched her reflection in the gleaming surface. The cavern was filled with tension. Each step Perseus took echoed faintly, and he feared the sisters might awaken at any moment. The snakes on Medusa's head twitched, sensing something, but she remained in her deep sleep. Perseus steadied his breath, gripping the sword gifted by the gods, knowing that the next moment would decide his fate. The sight of the sleeping Gorgons was both terrifying and strangely peaceful. They were monsters feared across the world, yet here they lay vulnerable, unaware of the hero who had come to end their reign. Perseus's courage was tested not by battle cries, but by silence, the silence of a cavern holding its breath. And so Perseus prepared himself. The sisters slept. The moment of destiny had arrived, and the slayer of Medusa was about to strike. Perseus stood at the threshold of destiny. The cavern was silent, except for the faint hiss of snakes slumbering on Medusa's head. Her immortal sisters lay nearby, their monstrous forms curled in uneasy sleep. This was the moment Perseus had been preparing for, the strike that would define his legend. He pulled the cap of invisibility tighter, ensuring he remained unseen. He raised Athena's polished shield, careful not to look directly at Medusa. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the mirror-like surface, distorted but clear enough to guide him. Every step echoed softly, and Perseus's heart pounded as he approached the sleeping monster. Medusa's face was terrible, even in slumber. Her serpents writhed lazily, sensing the presence of something near. Perseus steadied his breath, gripping the divine sword. He knew that one mistake, one glance, would turn him into stone, frozen forever among the statues that littered the cavern. With precision and courage, Perseus lifted the sword high. In a single swift motion, guided by Athena's wisdom and Hermes' speed, he brought it down upon Medusa's neck. The strike was clean, decisive, and final. Her body convulsed, the snakes shrieked, and then silence fell. From the severed neck of Medusa sprang two extraordinary beings, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior born fully armed. They were children of Medusa, hidden within her until the moment of her death. Their sudden appearance filled the cavern with awe, a reminder that even in death, Medusa's power was immense. Perseus quickly seized the head, careful not to look at it directly. He placed it inside a special bag, knowing that its deadly gaze remained potent even after death. The head of Medusa was now his weapon, a trophy of divine and heroic triumph. The immortal sisters awoke with furious cries, their shrieks echoing through the cavern. Perseus, however, was ready. With Hermes' sandals, he soared into the air, invisible and swift, escaping their wrath. The deed was done, Medusa was slain, and Perseus had achieved the impossible. This moment was the climax of his quest, the act that transformed him from a mortal boy into a hero of legend. The beheading of Medusa was not just a victory over a monster, but a triumph of courage, cunning, and divine favor. The moment Perseus struck down Medusa, the cavern was filled with a silence so heavy it seemed the world itself was holding its breath. But that silence did not last long. From the blood of Medusa's severed neck, something extraordinary happened. Two beings emerged, as if destiny itself had been waiting for this moment. First came Pegasus, the magnificent winged horse. His white body gleamed. Pegasus was not just a creature of beauty. He was a symbol of freedom, born from tragedy, yet destined to inspire awe. His sudden flight filled the dark cavern with light, as if hope itself had taken form. Next came Chrysaor, a warrior born fully armed, his name meaning golden sword. Unlike Pegasus, Chrysaor did not rise into the skies, but stood firmly on the ground, a figure of strength and power. He was less famous than his winged brother, but his presence was no less remarkable. Together, they were proof that even from the death of a monster, new life could spring forth, strange, miraculous, and unforgettable. Perseus watched in awe as these beings emerged. He had come to slay Medusa, but he had also unleashed something far greater. Pegasus and Chrysaor were not enemies. They were wonders, born of divine mystery, destined to play their own roles in the tapestry of myth. Pegasus, in particular, would go on to become one of the most beloved creatures in Greek mythology, carrying heroes across the skies and inspiring poets for centuries. Chrysaor, though less celebrated, symbolized the hidden strength that can emerge from unexpected places. For Perseus, their birth was both startling and reassuring. It was a reminder that his quest was not just about destruction, but about transformation. By slaying Medusa, he had not only ended her reign of terror, but also released new forces into the world, forces that carried beauty, strength, and destiny. And so, as Pegasus soared into the heavens, and Chrysaor stood tall, Perseus tightened his grip on the bag containing Medusa's head. His mission was far from over, but the legend had already grown richer. The slayer of Medusa was now witness to miracles, and the world would never forget what rose from her blood. The strike had been swift, the deed complete. Medusa was dead, her head safely tucked into Perseus's special bag. But the cavern did not remain silent for long. Her immortal sisters, Steno and Euryale, awoke with furious cries that shook the very walls. Their shrieks echoed like thunder, their claws scraped against stone, and their serpents hissed in rage. Perseus knew he could not fight them. Unlike Medusa, these sisters were immortal, untouchable by sword or spear. To face them directly would mean certain death. His only hope was escape, swift, clever, and unseen. He pulled the cap of invisibility tightly over his head, vanishing from sight. The sisters lunged wildly, their claws slashing at the air, their eyes searching for the intruder who had stolen their sister's life. But Perseus was gone, hidden by the god's gift. With Hermes's winged sandals, he soared upward, gliding through the cavern and out into the open sky. The Gorgon's cries followed him, echoing across the barren land, but they could not catch him. Their fury was endless, but their reach was limited. Perseus had outwitted them, slipping away like a shadow carried by the wind. The escape was not just physical, it was symbolic. Perseus had faced the greatest danger of his quest and survived. He had slain Medusa, avoided the wrath of her sisters, and carried with him a weapon more powerful than any sword, the head of the Gorgon, whose gaze could still turn enemies to stone. As he flew across the world, Perseus must have felt both relief and awe. He had achieved the impossible, and now he was free. The immortal sisters raged behind him, but their cries grew distant, fading into the silence of the edge of the world. Perseus was no longer a boy sent on a hopeless mission. He was a hero, triumphant and unstoppable. After slaying Medusa, escaping her immortal sisters, and rescuing Andromeda from the jaws of a sea monster, Perseus's journey finally turned back toward home. He had faced monsters, gods, and destiny itself. But now he carried with him the most dangerous weapon in all of Greece, the head of Medusa, sealed safely in his bag. Back on the island of Seriphos, things had not improved. King Polydex, cruel and arrogant as ever, continued to torment Dano. He had not given up his desire to force her into marriage, and with Perseus gone, he believed his victory was certain. Dano endured his schemes, waiting and hoping for her son's return. When Perseus finally stepped onto the shores of Seriphos, he was no longer the boy who had left. He was a hero, hardened by trials, armed with divine gifts, and carrying the proof of his triumph. Word spread quickly across the island. Perseus had returned. Polydex, however, was not impressed. He mocked Perseus, sneering at the idea that the young man had truly slain Medusa. He demanded proof, laughing at the thought that anyone could survive such an impossible quest. Perseus did not argue. He did not boast. Instead, he calmly reached into his bag and drew forth the head of Medusa. He held it high, careful not to look directly at it, and turned it toward Polydex and his court. In an instant, the laughter stopped. Polydex and his followers froze, their bodies stiffening. their faces twisted in shock. One by one they turned to stone, their arrogance captured forever in lifeless statues. The hall of the king became a gallery of stone figures, silent and unmoving. With Polydex gone, the island was freed from his cruelty. Danae was safe at last, and Dictys, the kind fisherman who had sheltered her and Perseus, was made king of Syria. Under his gentle rule, the island flourished, and the people rejoiced. Perseus had not only fulfilled his quest, but had also restored justice to his home. The return to Seriphos was not just a homecoming, it was the triumph of courage over cruelty, of destiny over deceit. After escaping the furious cries of Medusa's immortal sisters, Perseus soared across the skies with Hermes's winged sandals, carrying the deadly head of Medusa safely in his bag. His quest seemed complete, but fate had more adventures waiting. As he flew over distant lands, he came upon a scene that would change his life forever. On the rocky coast of Ethiopia, Perseus saw a young woman chained to a cliff, her figure silhouetted against the crashing waves. She was Andromeda, daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia. Her beauty was striking, but her situation was dire. She had been offered as a sacrifice to a sea monster sent by Poseidon to punish her mother's vanity. Cassiopeia had boasted that she was more beautiful than the sea nymphs, the Nereids. The gods, never fond of mortal arrogance, decided to teach her a lesson. The punishment was cruel. Andromeda was to be devoured by a monster unless someone intervened. Perseus, seeing her plight, felt both compassion and destiny stirring within him. He descended from the sky, invisible at first, then revealed himself as a hero. Andromeda, frightened but hopeful, told him her story. Perseus listened, his heart moved, and vowed to save her. As the waves roared, the sea monster emerged, massive and terrifying, its jaws wide and its eyes gleaming. The people of Ethiopia watched from the shore, helpless and despairing. But Perseus was ready. He drew Medusa's head from the bag, careful not to look at it directly, and held it high. The monster froze instantly, its body turning to stone as the deadly gaze of Medusa worked its power. The waves crashed against its petrified form, but it no longer moved. The threat was gone, defeated not by sword or spear, but by the weapon Perseus carried from his impossible quest. The people rejoiced, and Andromeda was freed from her chains. Perseus had not only saved her life, but also won her heart. Their meeting was more than chance, it was fate, weaving together the threads of heroism and love. And so, Perseus's journey gained a new purpose. He was no longer just the slayer of Medusa. He was the rescuer of Andromeda, the hero who turned despair into hope. Together, they would face new challenges. But for now, the coast was filled with celebration, and the legend of Perseus grew even greater. When Perseus returned to Seriphos, he found that nothing had changed under King Polydex's rule. The cruel king still tormented Danae, pressing her to marry him against her will. Polydex believed Perseus had failed in his quest and would never return. He thought himself safe, powerful, and untouchable. But Perseus was back, not as the boy who had left, but as the hero who had slain Medusa. He carried with him the most dangerous weapon in the world, the Gorgon's head, whose gaze could turn even the proudest king into stone. Polydex gathered his court, mocking Perseus when he claimed to have succeeded. The hall rang with laughter, nobles sneering at the young man who dared to challenge their king. Danae stood quietly, her heart filled with hope. waiting for her son to reveal the truth. Perseus did not argue. He did not shout. Instead, he calmly reached into his bag and drew forth Medusa's head. He held it high, careful not to look directly at it, and turned it toward Polydex and his followers. The laughter stopped instantly. One by one, the nobles froze, their faces twisted in shock. Polydex himself stiffened, his arrogance captured forever in stone. The hall became silent, transformed into a gallery of statues, a monument to cruelty, punished and justice delivered. With Polydex gone, the island was freed from his tyranny. Dano was safe at last, and Dictys, the kind fisherman who had sheltered her and Perseus, was made king of Syria. Under his gentle rule, the island flourished, and the people rejoiced. This act was not just vengeance, it was justice. Perseus had defended his mother, protected the innocent, and restored balance to the island. The boy who had once been cast into the sea in a wooden chest had returned as a hero, bringing justice against the king who had wronged his family. Perseus had lived a life shaped by prophecy, guided by the gods, and filled with impossible challenges. From the bronze chamber of his mother Dano to the lair of Medusa, from the rescue of Andromeda to the justice against Polydex, his story was one of courage, cunning, and destiny. But even heroes cannot escape fate. The prophecy that had haunted King Acrisius from the beginning finally came true. Though Perseus never sought to harm his grandfather, destiny found its way during a sporting event. Perseus threw a discus that flew off course. It struck Acrisius, killing him instantly. The prophecy had been fulfilled, not through malice, but through the quiet inevitability of fate. Perseus, burdened by this tragic accident, chose not to rule Argos, his grandfather's kingdom. Instead, he exchanged it for another land, founding the city of Mycenae, which would later become one of the greatest centers of Greek civilization. His legacy was not just in his victories, but in the foundations he laid for future generations. With Andromeda by his side, Perseus lived as a king, a husband, and a father. Their children carried on his bloodline, weaving his name into the fabric of myth and history. Pegasus, the winged horse born from Medusa's blood, soared into legends of his own, while the head of Medusa remained a symbol of Perseus's triumph, eventually given to Athena to adorn her shield. Perseus's fate was a reminder that even heroes are bound by destiny. His life was filled with glory and sorrow, victories and burdens, but his legacy endured. He was remembered not only as the slayer of Medusa, but as a founder, a rescuer, and a man who proved that courage and wit could overcome even the darkest of challenges. And so, the tale of Perseus comes to its close. His journey from a child cast into the sea to a hero celebrated across the world is one of the greatest stories of Greek mythology. It teaches us that fate may be unavoidable, but how we face it defines who we are. The story drifts into silence now, like waves settling after a storm. Perseus rests among the stars, his legend shining softly in the night sky. And as the myths fade into dreams, it is time for us to rest. Good night.